The man had arrived at the orbital scrapyard station with a plan so modest it could barely be called a plan: sell a broken navigation chip, eat something that wouldn't argue back, and leave before anything exploded. Unfortunately, the station specialized in ruining modest plans. He found himself dragged by the current of bodies into the lower market, where gravity flickered just enough to make everyone look slightly uncertain about their own legs. Vendors shouted over one another, drones buzzed with misplaced urgency, and something in a cage was either singing or issuing a legal threat. He only realized an auction was happening when a mechanical arm shoved a paddle into his hand and refused to let go. "Congratulations," said a voice beside him, cheerful in a way that suggested trouble. "You're participating now." "I didn't agree to." "Too late, that's legally enthusiasm." He considered arguing, but the last man who argued was gently lifted by a hovering forklift and relocated upside down. The man decided enthusiasm was acceptable. The auctioneer stood on a platform that wobbled in defiance of physics, waving a tablet and sneezing at intervals that seemed to affect the bidding process. "Next item," the auctioneer declared, voice cracking through a speaker that had clearly given up on clarity years ago. "Rare biological specimen, lightly used, minimal complaints, excellent posture." That was when he saw her. She stood still while the crowd leaned forward with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for disasters. At first glance she looked human, too human for this place, but then her long ears curved back in a way no humans ever had, elegant and strange, as if they were listening to something far beyond the noise of the station. Her eyes moved slowly across the crowd, not frightened, not pleading, just measuring. "She looks expensive," he muttered. "Everything here looks expensive until you check the warranty," the cheerful stranger replied. The auctioneer sneezed violently. "Starting bid, ACHOO $1. The crowd laughed. Someone dropped a crate. A drone spun in confused circles. $1, the man repeated, staring at the useless coin in his pocket, the one currency no machine would accept. It felt like the universe had suddenly developed a sense of humor, and he wasn't sure he liked being the punchline. He raised the paddle, mostly as a joke, partly because no one else did. "Sold." The auctioneer shouted immediately, as if eager to finish before sneezing again. Silence followed, then more laughter. The cheerful stranger clapped him on the back. "You just bought a person with a coin older than common sense." "Oh, I didn't mean to." "Legally, you meant it with passion." Paperwork appeared faster than logic. A clerk shoved a glowing contract into his hands, pointing at clauses that seemed to multiply as he read them. He caught phrases like bonded status, transfer of responsibility, and, disturbingly, marital stabilization requirement. "Wait," he said, squinting. "Why does this say marriage?" "Oh, for tax purposes," the clerk said, already bored, "and emotional balance." "I am not emotionally balanced. That's why it's mandatory." He looked up, hoping for support, but the crowd had already moved on to a crate that was definitely trying to escape. When he turned back, she was standing in front of him. Closer now, he could see the faint shimmer along her skin, like light hesitating before deciding what color to be. Her ears tilted slightly toward him. "You are my purchaser," she said quietly. "I think that was an accident." "Accidents are still events," she replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "That's annoyingly logical." "I find logic efficient." They began walking, though he wasn't sure who decided that. The station groaned around them, lights flickering as if reconsidering their existence. He tried to think of something to say that wouldn't make this worse, which was difficult because everything already was worse. "I should warn you," he said finally, "I'm not exactly qualified for any of this." She glanced at him, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something like amusement. "I am beginning to suspect that," she said. By the time they reached his cargo quarters, he had already decided two things. First, this situation was temporary, and second, the station would probably explode before he figured out how to fix it. The door slid open after 3 attempts and one apologetic kick. "This is where I live," he said, gesturing at the narrow space filled with mismatched equipment, loose wires, and a chair that looked emotionally unstable. She stepped inside, her gaze moving across everything with quiet precision. Her ears tilted slightly, as if the room itself were speaking to her in frequencies he couldn't hear. "It is structurally honest," she said. "That's the nicest way anyone's ever called it a mess." He cleared a pile of parts off the only other seat. It collapsed immediately. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly pushed the remains aside with his foot. "I can fix that," he muttered. "You will not," she replied calmly. "That obvious." "Yes." There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. He realized he had no idea what people were supposed to do after accidentally marrying someone. So, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, there's probably rules about this. There are, she said. That's not reassuring. I have read them. He blinked when, while you were arguing with the door. I wasn't arguing, it started it. Oh, she ignored that. The contract defines our arrangement as a cooperative domestic and legal unit. That sounds like two people pretending they know what they're doing. That is an accurate interpretation. Oh, he let out a short laugh despite himself. Good, at least we're both unqualified. She moved toward the small viewport, staring out at the drifting metal and distant stars. For a moment she said nothing, and he almost forgot to be nervous. Then her ears twitched sharply. The station's reactor will fluctuate in approximately 3 minutes, she said. He frowned. You can't know that. Oh, 1 minute and 48 seconds now. He opened his mouth to argue, but the lights flickered. A low hum shifted into a strained vibration. Somewhere far below, something clanged loudly, followed by a distant, very offended alarm. He stared at her. You guessed. I do not guess. Another flicker, the hum stabilized. The alarm stopped as if embarrassed. He exhaled slowly. Okay, that's new. It is not new, she said. It is simply not something you perceive. Oh, great, he muttered. I marry someone who hears problems before they happen. That's not stressful at all. She turned to him, studying his face with a calm intensity that made him shift slightly. You are not afraid, she said. I am constantly afraid, he replied. I just hide it behind bad decisions. That explains much. He pointed at her. You're funny. You pretend you're not, but you are. I am not attempting humor. That's what makes it worse. Oh. For a moment, something softened in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough to exist. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. All right, your turn. Who are you really? Oh. She was quiet again, her gaze drifting slightly, as if searching for an answer she wasn't sure she was allowed to give. I was categorized as non-essential, she said finally. That's not an answer. It is the only one I was permitted to keep. Oh. He frowned. Permitted by who? She didn't respond. Instead, her ears tilted again, more sharply this time. There is a signal, she said. He groaned. Please tell me it's not another thing about to break. It is not a malfunction. Oh, that's somehow worse. She looked at him, and this time there was no hint of humor left. It is searching, she said quietly. For what? He asked. Her eyes met his, steady and certain. For me. Oh. He didn't like the way she said it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was. People who weren't afraid tended to say dangerous things very calmly. All right, he said, grabbing a loose cable off the floor as if it were a weapon, which it absolutely was. Define searching in a way that doesn't end with us being vaporized. She tilted her head slightly, listening again to something beyond the room. It is triangulating signals. It believes I am still classified as lost property. Oh, that's insulting, he muttered. You're clearly at least mildly found. Her eyes flicked toward him. Your attempt at humor is noted. Good, I'm aiming for distracting, not effective. Oh. The station lights flickered again, but this time not from a struggling reactor. This felt deliberate, like something tapping on the walls of reality just to see what would happen. A low-frequency pulse passed through the floor, and he felt it in his teeth. I'm guessing that's not normal, he said. No, she replied. They are close. He took a breath, longer than usual, as if he could stretch courage out of it. A day ago, he had been a man with a broken navigation chip and no real direction. Now he was apparently defending someone the galaxy had decided was worth hunting. Well, he said, straightening slightly, that's inconvenient for them. Oh. She looked at him, a fraction of curiosity breaking through her calm. You intend to resist. I intend to survive, he said. Resisting just happens to be part of that. A sharp metallic crack echoed through the corridor outside. Something heavy landed, followed by footsteps that were too synchronized to belong to anything friendly. He glanced at the door. You can do that thing again, right? The knowing things before they happen. Yes, great. Then tell me we're going to be fine. She paused. That is not how it works. Worth a try. The door hissed open without permission. Figures stood beyond it, armored in a way that suggested they didn't expect negotiation. Their helmets glowed faintly, scanning, calculating. Asset located, one of them said, voice filtered and flat. Prepare retrieval. He stepped forward before he had time to reconsider, holding up the useless cable like it had authority. She's not an asset. The figures didn't react. He suspected they had heard worse arguments. She is registered property, the voice replied. He glanced back at her just for a second. You okay with me disagreeing? I am, she said. Good. He turned back. Then you're wrong. There was a brief pause, the kind that usually came before something unpleasant. She moved then, not fast in the way of panic, but precise. Her ears angled forward, and the air seemed to shift, as if the station itself were suddenly listening to her. Lights along the corridor flickered in patterns, panels unlocking and locking in rapid succession. The armored figures hesitated for the first time. They rely on the system, she said quietly. Yeah, that's usually how systems work. I can speak to it. Of course you can, he muttered. Why wouldn't that be a thing? Oh. The walls hummed, louder now, responding to her in a language he couldn't understand. Doors slammed shut behind the intruders. Gravity twisted just enough to throw them off balance. One of them fired a pulse that hit the ceiling instead, leaving a smoking mark and what looked like an apology from the lighting system. He blinked. Remind me never to argue with you. I will remember that, she said. Within moments the corridor fell silent again. The figures were gone, sealed off somewhere deeper in the station, trapped in a maze that had suddenly decided it didn't like them. The hum faded, the light steadied. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Okay, he said, nodding slowly. That was impressive, terrifying but impressive. She turned to him fully now. I was not meant to be owned, she said. I was meant to be controlled. Oh. Wells, he replied, dropping the cable. They did a terrible job. There was a pause and then finally she smiled, small but real. You did not control me, she said. I tried to fix a chair and failed, he said. Control was never on the table. Something shifted between them then, quieter than the chaos but more certain. Not a contract, not a clause, not something written in a system designed by strangers. Are they going to come back? He asked. Yes, she said. He nodded. Then we'll be gone before they do. You have a plan. He hesitated. I have the beginning of one. That is not reassuring. It's more than I had yesterday. Oh. She considered that, then stepped closer to the viewport, watching the endless drift of metal and stars. I will stay, she said. He looked at her surprised. You're choosing that. Yes. He smiled slightly, tired but genuine. Good. Because I'm starting to think this accidental marriage might actually work. That remains to be evaluated, she replied. Fair, he said, but I'm optimistic, which is new and frankly a little suspicious. Oh. The station creaked around them, alive in its own broken way, but for the first time since he arrived, he didn't feel like he was just passing through. He had something worth staying for. He had never left the station voluntarily before, which made preparing to leave feel suspiciously like growth. He didn't trust it. Growth sounded like responsibility wearing a nicer outfit. We need a ship, he said, pacing in a line that suggested urgency but achieved very little, preferably one that doesn't explode when you look at it wrong. Your standards are improving, she replied. I'm evolving under pressure. Oh. They stood in front of a docking bay where a narrow transport vessel waited, its hull patched in places that implied optimism rather than engineering. He squinted at it. That one looks like it believes in second chances, he said. It has failed inspection 17 times, she noted. 18 is a lucky number. It is not. Let me have this. She allowed it. Getting aboard required bypassing 3 locks, 1 security drone, and a vending machine that insisted on charging them for access. He paid it with the same useless coin. It accepted. He stared at it. I'm starting to think this coin is cursed. Or valuable in ways you do not understand, she said. Story of my life. Oh. The ship powered up with a reluctant hum, like something waking from a nap it didn't agree to take. He slid into the pilot's seat, hands hovering over controls he barely understood. You can help with this, right? He asked. Yes, she said, stepping closer, her presence steady, certain. I can guide the system. Good, because my plan ends at sit down confidently. That is not a plan. It got me this far. Oh. The station alarms began to rise again, sharper this time, more coordinated. Whatever had been trapped before had found a way out, or something worse had arrived to replace it. They are adapting, she said. Of course they are, he muttered. Everyone adapts except me. That is not accurate. He glanced at her. No. You chose to stay, she said. Now you are choosing to leave. Both decisions are significant. He blinked, then shook his head slightly. Don't say meaningful things while I'm trying not to panic. The ship lifted with a jolt that suggested it objected to gravity on a personal level. Outside, the station shifted, sections sealing, others opening, as if unsure whether to hold them or push them away. Coordinates? He asked. She closed her eyes briefly, her ears angling as if catching signals beyond the visible. There is a corridor through the debris field, narrow but stable. Narrow and stable, he repeated. My two least favorite words combined. Trust me, she said. He did. That was new. They surged forward, weaving through drifting metal and fragments of forgotten ships. Behind them, dark shapes emerged from the station, faster now, more precise. They are persistent, he said. They are afraid, she replied. Of you. Of what I represent. He tightened his grip on the controls. Then let's be very representative somewhere else. A sharp pulse shot past them, grazing the hull. The ship rattled in protest. Still optimistic, she asked. Extremely, he said, in a terrified kind of way. Oh. She reached out, her hand resting lightly against the console. The ship responded instantly, stabilizing, adjusting its path with a precision he knew wasn't his. The stars ahead seemed to open, a path forming where there had been none. They cannot follow this route, she said. Good, he replied. I'm not in the mood for company. The pursuing shapes faltered, then vanished behind the shifting debris. Silence followed, vast and unexpected. He exhaled slowly, leaning back. Did we just win? We survived, she said. I'll take it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ship drifted into open space, the station shrinking behind them until it was just another piece of forgotten metal in a very large universe. He looked at her, really looked this time, not as a problem or an accident, but as someone who had changed everything simply by existing near him. So, he said, what happens now? She considered the question, then met his gaze. Now we decide what we are without contracts. He smiled, a little uncertain but real. That sounds complicated. It will be, she said. Goods, he replied. I'm getting better at complicated. She tilted her head slightly, that almost smile returning. You are, she said. He glanced at the endless stars ahead, then back at her. Then let's not waste the improvement. The ship moved forward not because it had to, but because they chose it to.